Unitarian Universalism is a group of people who think asking big questions really matters. Things like, where do we come from? What happens to us after we die? What are we supposed to do with our one wild and precious life? We've only got a limited amount of time. And so who do we spend it with and why? How? Questions like that are best answered in community.
Welcome to Showing Up, a podcast on how Unitarian Universalists live out their faith in the Empire State, brought to you by the First Unitarian Church of Rochester, New York. I am your host, the Reverend Verdis LeVar Robinson, Minister for Growth at the First Unitarian Church of Rochester. And in this season, we will be exploring our newly articulated shared Unitarian Universalist values with love at the center. How can, and why must our shared values be lived out in the world? In this season, our guests, a wide variety of congregants, religious professionals, community leaders, even farmers from New York State and beyond, will share their experiences, hopes, dreams, and wisdom to guide us in practicing what we Unitarian Universalists value. In our first episode, I am joined by the Reverend Shari Halliday Quan, lead minister of the First Unitarian Church of Rochester, as we begin our exploration, first sharing our elevator speeches on what Unitarian Universalism is, and then sharing our personal stories on how we found love at the center of this faith tradition. Let's get into it. So, Reverend Shari, thank you so much for joining us on this pilot of a podcast here of Showing Up. So I got a question for you, though. And, I'll answer it too, to be fair.
Thank you.
But imagine that you were in an elevator and you have a stole on and someone asks you, and clearly look like you're a clergy person. And they ask you, what church are you from? And you say, Unitarian Universalism. And they say, oh, what's that? And you know that you have from like floor 1 through floor 5 to give an elevator speech on what is Unitarian Universalism. So what would you say?
Yeah, well, so first of all, I'd say I don't have to imagine this because it happens all of the time, right? And it happens to me, yes, because I'm a minister, but I think even those who don't look obviously like they're clergy, they're not wearing any sort of garb, Unitarian Universalists get asked this question all the time, in part because a lot of us don't seem like people who go to church, and so people are surprised. And then also there are lots of folks who don't yet know what Unitarian Universalism is. And so sometimes it's out of curiosity. Sometimes there's like a little bit of challenge. Like there's like, okay, well, are you a cult? They want to sort of check you out. But we get this question a lot. And so I don't have to imagine so much as remember and hope that some of the time, at least, I did a pretty good job answering the question. So I think that only took me to like floor 15 and I'm out of time. But let's start here. It depends on who I'm talking with. Typically, I say something like, Unitarian Universalism is a group of people who think asking big questions really matters. Things like, where do we come from? What happens to us after we die? What are we supposed to do with our one wild and precious life? We've only got a limited amount of time. And so who do we spend it with and why? How? Questions like that are best answered in community. It doesn't mean that we all have to have the same answer, but that when I ask that question and look for an answer alongside other people who are also open and curious and have different answers than me, my faith, my practice, what it means to be grounded in the values that really matter to me are strengthened through the company of others. So that's really what Unitarian Universalism, I think, seeks to do, is to ask how and why we live, and then what are we to do with that? Because we don't agree on what happens after we die or what happens before we're born, we tend to focus a lot on this time here, the here and the now. And ultimately, we're working towards putting love and our values into action, creating, you can think of it as just a better world. You can think of it as the kingdom on earth. A little bit of paradise is something that we can offer one another. So that is essentially what Unitarian Universalism is. But if you didn't quite get that, or even if you're curious a little bit, come check us out on Sundays.
Yeah.
That's typically what I say. And I like to end with an invitation.
Yes. Wonderful. I might steal some of that.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
great.
I will say mine changes all the time because I hear someone else and think, God, that was such a great answer, which is, I mean, that's the point, right? Is like when I hear
Mhm.
other people's answers to important questions, it shifts how I think.
Yeah, yeah. So mine is like if I'm going from floor one to floor two. If it's like
Your short
very
one.
something very quick to now, if I was going, to the Empire, top of the Empire State Building, that'll be different.
Sure.
But and it kind of reflects my journey in the sense where Unitarian Universalism is a place where you can come as you are, but leave inspired and inspiring the world. So abstractly, it really talks about, the inherent worth and dignity. It talks about our journey through justice and love, and with love at the center, but also that we have some work to do. We have some work to do in this world, whether, like you said, making the world a better place or inspiring the world to be better. But that really was something that freed me, that of coming as I was, but not to be changed in the way to accommodate or to assimilate, but definitely transformed in by being inspired, but even going further transformation to inspiring. So that's my elevator speech, and then it opens up like, so what do you mean by, there we go.
Totally.
Yes.
I love that. I think that's a gorgeous elevator pitch or speech.
Yeah. And it preaches.
Don't I know it?
Recently, I went on Facebook, and I just inquired with some of our colleagues about what's their elevator speech for Unitarian Universalism, and quite a few of them actually answered. And so one of our colleagues, I believe that they are from Virginia, and that's Reverend Tyler Coles. And this is what he has to say. He said, depending on the context and vibe, I usually say, we believe that we are one in creation, bound up and set free through love, grace, and mercy. Wow.
It's gorgeous. I
Yeah.
love that.
So,
I think that's great. So Jen Raffensperger, who serves in Roanoke, Virginia, she writes, we are a faith that focuses our attention on shared values rather than specific shared beliefs. We support one another in love and accountability on our individual spiritual journeys as they inform our work for love and justice in the world.
wow.
It's pretty similar to mine. We use different words, but I think she's got all the main points there.
Yes, yes. Especially the accountability part.
Right.
We're working on it.
Yep. Always.
Yes. So, a UU buddy, well, I would say a seminary buddy of mine, Reverend Beth Mulholland, who I believe is in Wisconsin right now. So, Reverend Beth said, I usually say something like this: UUs are rooted in shared values that center love as a uniting and guiding spirit in all life. And we are called by love to work for collective thriving.
I love that. The Bowie Kling Garcia says, we are centered more on how to make the world a better place than what we think happens after it. It's short and sweet.
It is very short and sweet. I mean, that's like from floor one to floor two.
I mean, you know you're going to have enough time for that.
Right. You've heard ours. Now share yours. You can share them in the comment section or with each other. Up next, Reverend Shari and I share our love stories. Unitarian Universalism has just adopted an articulation of our values that puts love right at the center. And one of the questions a lot of us have is, what do we mean by love? How do we find it in Unitarian Universalism? Let's get into it. So, Reverend Shari, what is your origin story, or what is your love story?
Yeah, what's my meet cute? Um, I'll start by saying, of course, there's not just one. Like any sort of long-term love affair, what love looks like between me and Unitarian Universalism and the communities that I'm in shifts and grows. And there are 1,000 stories that layer on top of each other, right? The kind of love that you have with a sibling that, you've been in a relationship with for 40 years is really different than the stranger you ran into, like, while both trying to buy the same baguette. But I'll start with the meet cute, which is, so my wife grew up Unitarian Universalist, or the person who is now my wife. At the time, this pretty woman I was dating grew up Unitarian Universalist, and we had been talking about going to this UU congregation that was near us for some time, but somehow, I don't know, through the website or through the rumors, she had this stereotype of who they were there, that they were basically just a bunch of hippies who sat around barefoot in a circle smoking pot on Sunday mornings, was how she talked about it. And she was like, I do not want to go to that church. Like, I don't. And then one day there was a Soul Trek event that we heard about. So it was a group of people getting together to watch an episode of Star Trek and then talk about it. What were the ethics involved in this episode? How did that apply to life now? And what did that mean to Unitarian Universalists? And so that was the first thing that brought us in the doors of that congregation. And we walked in and we were like, wait a minute, like, this is a cool place. Like, I'd really like to come back here. And I mentioned that to her and she was like, all right, well, look, like, again, I do not want to be barefoot in a circle. Like, that's not the kind of community I'm looking for. But we had a great time at Soul Trek. And so the next week she thought, okay, let's give it a try. And we came in and it was not at all what she had been expecting. There was a warm welcome, a fairly small congregation of mostly older people, someone next to us who came in like 20 minutes late with her Starbucks latte and like was completely unapologetic about it and just like was happy to be there. And we were like, okay, so like it's very relaxed here, but they take what we're doing here seriously. They understand that people are here with like a lot to hope for and seeking inspiration. And also people are coming in with really hard things. And we were just really taken with what it meant to have a space to sit down and feel like we were being asked to reconnect with our values, but not produce anything. And after about 35 minutes, the sermon started. And this person started with the words, "Hear this gently, my dears. Everyone you love will die." And I remember my wife grabbing my hand and both of us just like, there was this moment of like, both on one hand, like, WTF, that's a heck of a way to start a sermon. And like, screw you. I mean, that is true. And also, how dare you? And also this incredible sense of care and trust that in the face of unspeakable loss, right? This truth that all of us will die, that all of us have limited amounts of time, and at that moment in my life, limited amounts of control over the world, right? As opposed to now where I have massive control over the world. I'm kidding, right? But like, really this sense of we are struggling to make the world a better place. We're all struggling to do important and good things in our lives, and just there will be loss in the face of that. There will be struggle in the face of that. Spoke to the moment that both of us were in at that time, where we were working through some really hard health challenges, and mortality and death felt really close, quite frankly. And that there's incredible love and care and depth in that, that in this reality, here comes a group of people saying, and this is what it means to be joyful. This is what it means to celebrate. This is what it means to strive. This is what it means to comfort.
Yeah.
Just it so concisely spoke to everything that I was looking for, which is I felt like up until that moment, I had been offered a place in the world that either was happy and joyful or like cynical and had a great power analysis, but ultimately thought, the good guys won't win. And like, how do we hold the complexity together? Like, it was this like tiny droplet of like, oh, this is a group of people I want to be around because they can hold both of those things, and they'll hold me in it and I'll learn to hold others in it. So that's my initial LUUve story. And it's probably not as good as like, oh, we both tried to buy the same pair of shoes. But
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing that story, your initial love story. So
yeah.
I'm sure there's more love where that
Oh,
came
totally.
from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you?
Well, I've preached about this so much because it my love story is something that changed my life. In other words, I had a conversion experience, but I had a conversion experience in coffee hour, of all places, in coffee hour in the service. So let me take you back. Let me take you back a little bit. So I grew up Holiness Pentecostal, and then I became a Holiness Pentecostal minister. And my particular denomination that I was in, homosexuality was a sin. After about 30 years, I could not hide it anymore. I was just like, you know what? I lived for so long with the fear of hell, the fear of going to hell because of who I loved and who I naturally loved, even though I tried not to. Tried so hard not to. I tried to pray the gay away, all of that, right? To the point where I would go into services, and in Pentecostalism, the spirit moves, right? And some people run, some people, dance. I wept. I got to the point where I was just weeping because I felt that I was like the worst thing ever. It got to the point where I just could not do it any longer. And even as a minister, within a denomination, I just decided that I wanted to live my truth. And so my saying is that, I would rather live my truth and go to hell than live and lie and still go to hell, according to, the tenets of that denomination. So, so I was talking to one of my professor buddies, because I was a professor at the time, and he was like, "You might like my church." And I was like, "Oh, I've been to your church, and I'm very confused with all the religious symbols all over the place. What do y'all even believe? Do y'all believe in anything?" And he was like, "Oh, just come, just come. I think you might like it." So I was like, "Fine." So I show up. It was like during the summer, and they were in transition, ministerial transition. So there was an interim minister there, and I show up, and I'm looking for my friend, and he wasn't even there. So I'm there by myself, like surrounded by, like all these like people that, I lived in Rochester all my life, but I've never met any of these people. They seem nice enough. And then there was something that was said where I interpreted as anti-Christian. Now, that I don't think that was the intent, but it was a little joke and people laughed, and I was like, ooh, maybe this is not the place for me. But I stayed with it because they started to sing this song called Gather the Spirit. And I was like, okay, all right, here we talk about spirit and gathering, and there's something about this song that is like gathering my spirit right now in a different way than I'm used to.
Uh-huh.
And the way that they sang it so vibrantly, and I was like, okay, maybe I can remain here. So I was, invited to coffee hour. So I go to get the coffee hour, and I never forget it. His name was Tim. And Tim was about 80 something years old, and he's in his mid 80s. And he's sitting by himself, and he saw that I was by myself in coffee hour. So he comes to me, and he's just like, just out of the blue, "Hey, are you gay?" And I was like, wait a minute, is there a sign on my forehead or something like that? Like, so I was like, okay, I saw the pride flag outside of the church and whatnot. So I was like, fine. yes, I am. He was like, well, that's great. And I was like, okay, what kind of a church is this? And not only did he say that, but then he went even further. Like, do you have a boyfriend? And I was like, okay, I just really just came out like a
Right.
month ago. And I was like, no, I don't. And he was like, well, when you do, bring him here. And I was like, what kind of a church is this? Like, really? That would not have been said at all. My where I came from, was like, don't ask, don't tell, basically. Because we were there, but still are. But operated in that. So I had a little courage, right? Little liquid courage, coffee, and um and um and there was a group of church ladies that were there, and I decided, hey, I'm just gonna like just come out with it and be like, hey, I'm gay, and where I came from, they believe I have this evil spirit in me, and they wanted to cast it out, and I just started laughing. And they literally clutched their pearls. Like, I have pearls on right now. They didn't have, none of them had pearls on, by the way, but they
But they,
literally were like, they clutched their pearls, right? And they weren't laughing. And then when I saw that they weren't laughing with me, then the mood shifted. And I remember it like, there was a mood shift that became compassionate, it was so genuine, so authentic love. And this is before the pandemic, right? So they, one by one, they grabbed me, put their arms around me, and then started whispering affirmations into my ear that I still hear to this very day, saying, you are loved, we love you, there is nothing wrong with you. It doesn't matter who you love, you are welcome. All of that was, and they just passed me along like communion, whispering affirmations in my ear, and I just broke down. Not in sorrow, not in sadness, but in joy of authentic affirmation that I've been seeking for 30 years of my life. And that's how I knew. I was like, this place is special. In fact, a year after that, I preached my first lay sermon, because I wasn't a minister in the Unitarian Universalist sense, but I became a lay minister, basically.
Yeah.
And I preached my first sermon, and that sermon was said, this church saves lives.
Amen.
And my first pride. So that's my love story. The love I first felt. And now I'm giving that love back. Not just to any or every congregation, but to the world. Giving that love back. So, yeah.
Verdis, that's such a powerful story. The seriousness with which they saw you and saw you in a fullness that, you were willing to laugh off, and that they weren't going to let you off the hook, right? That, no, this is who you are and you are loved. That clarity, that's some really old school church stuff, right? That's what it means to come to Unitarian Universalist services week after week, and it's just a habit of being, right?
Right, and they weren't trained. No one trained them to do that, and that wasn't a common practice that they did,
right,
of hugging strangers from out, off the street and whispering affirmations. It is something that, because love was at the center, was always the center of their practice and who they were as a community, that automatically they went there. That was very, very powerful to me. And 15, 16 years later, here I am.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for Showing Up. Tune in this season as we explore each of our shared values. Make sure to like and subscribe and comment. Until next time, keep showing up.